I am recording now.
Welcome to Brotherhood, a spoiler-filled podcast where we review each episode of the deliciously nightmare-inducing work that is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. My name is Timothy MacArthur, the taller brother.
And my name is Dylan MacArthur, the older brother.
Today's episode, Full Metal Alchemist,
the self-titled debut album.
Hooray.
So I guess the episode starts off, we see who we will eventually discover is Isaac the Freezer. And then we have a nice, expensive-looking transition shot to the magical land of where else but people sitting in an office.
I believe it's in what's called Central. What
is Central? Or do we find out eventually? Because I wasn't quite sure.
It's kind of the military capital of Amestris. It's like, where all the military people are, basically, like, the central command of all the military.
Okay, but is it the capital, or is it the military capital? Because there seems to be a very strong correlation.
It's both the military capital and the capital. But there are some parts of Amestris that are just a little stronger, if not way stronger in terms of military power, which you'll find out later.
It's clear that this is pretty much a military state.
Oh boy, is it.
I mean, not only do all of the characters talk very strongly about the military and their time in the military, and it seems to be sort of the dominant organization of this world, but we also get a lot of conversation about a past war that sort of hovers over every single conversation, whether it's mentioned explicitly or not. Yeah, the War of Ishval, which you will learn about in later episodes. I'm not going to tell you anything. At least not for now. So we're transported to what is a recurring theme in this show, which is people sitting down talking in an office, because that's super cheap to animate. And we get this...
And it's actually pretty good. I mean, because, they don't do it for too long.
They do. I want to talk about this because one of the first notes that I have written down is later on, after our main characters meet Isaac the Freezer for the first time and they are back to an office sitting down, we get a line which I translated down on my notepad as, "Didn't you listen to your exposition scene? Of course you didn't. You didn't have the audience with you yet." But I mean, this is a common thing. This is a common line that we see. It's so much that it's a cliche where it's like, weren't you paying attention during your briefing? And our intrepid hero says, I don't have time to pay attention. And it's like, of course he doesn't have time because the audience wasn't following the story yet. And so now we have to have this forced line about, you should be paying more attention. And it is a bit distracting, honestly, the number of times how that a character will say something in this episode that is clearly meant to serve no other function than to deliver information.
Dylan, you haven't seen the rest of the season, but this is by far not the best episode. I mean, it's a good episode, but it's not their best. And I love how that is, because that means it doesn't fall to spectacle creep.
This is kind of an unusual episode because, in a sense, Isaac the Freezer feels sort of like a monster of the week character, where he doesn't really mean anything. We get the sense that this event probably isn't going to have any sort of lasting impact on the story, and yet every single set piece feels deadly serious.
Oh boy, is it. Except for me, even Armstrong feels very serious.
His line when he's getting ready to punch through this giant, we're skipping ahead here, this giant ice transmutation circle, that line feels like it should be happening in a finale. Like, this is going to be his big one-liner, and it's the first episode.
Yeah, but by far, they were definitely holding back for this episode, Dylan, because this is definitely not the finale, trust me.
Honestly, I think where this episode succeeds the most, and this ties back into all of the notes that I have here about exposition, is that whenever it's hinting at something, it's great. Like, you hear it and you're like, oh, like that's interesting. That's probably going to lead to something. But lines like, oh, do you remember? The human body is 70% water. It's like that line almost doesn't even need to be there.
They don't. I mean, it doesn't need to be in there. But if you say it like, "Do you remember?" which they didn't, then it would be a lot lamer. But they didn't do that. It was just as if he was recounting it. Like,
recounting it in a way that is very convenient for the audience. And I couldn't help but think that this is not the strongest writing that we're going to see in this series. And I know that it's not because I have seen the next episode already. And the next episode, the exposition is way better.
Yep.
Because every single time we have a delivery of information, it's not just an info dump, it's always pushing the story forward. Whereas here, you have a lot of lines where it's just like, yeah, you didn't really need that. You could have taken that out and it would have been exactly the same.
It is true, but it's the very first episode, so they don't need to make it as good as the other ones. I mean, sure, they didn't need all those info dump lines or whatever you want to call them. But in all actuality, I think the fact that they didn't do as well on this episode is probably a good thing, because it doesn't need to be that good.
This should be the pilot. Like, in normal shows, this is the episode where you would see, oh, this is our character's history, and this is what they're going to be doing in the future. You don't get either of those two, really, in this episode, which is kind of strange.
Yeah, it is strange. But Dylan?
Yes?
Oh, man, I don't know if I want to say it. Oh, my gosh. There's just...
I guess, here, let me ask you this question. How much of what happens in this episode actually leads to anything in the future? Because we have hints about what happened in the past, which are clearly going to pay off.
You're killing me. I'm going to give spoilers.
You don't have to tell
business.
You don't have to tell me what happens. All I'm asking is there anything that is set up in this episode that will happen later on?
Yeah.
Yes or no? Okay, yeah. So, all right. Should we go through the rest of the events of the episode, or should we continue just talking about general impressions? Because I have a lot of things which I could talk about, a lot of little different things that I noticed throughout, and we could absolutely just go through the events of the episode and talk about them.
I think we should try starting in order now.
Okay, so we've talked about the exposition and the sitting in offices that takes place, and we are given our introduction to the main characters. We're told we're going to hire the full metal alchemist, and you see this giant metal figure next to a much shorter, definitely human figure. And I think that we're supposed to believe at this point that the giant metal figure is the full metal alchemist, because of course he would be. But then in the very next scene, not even just a scene later, but the very next scene, immediately we're told, no, that's not the Full Metal Alchemist. The shorter one is the Full Metal Alchemist, which I just thought was very strange. Like, they don't even...
he does have a metal arm and leg.
Where does this name come from? Because that seems like a terrible name to me.
I think it's I think it was supposed to be a sense of irony type thing. Also... I mean,
it is funny, but it's also kind of not
lame.
A great... Well, it's not lame. I'm just saying, it's not very descriptive.
It isn't, but I like it, because it leads to these moments where Ed totally flips out because of his Napoleon complex.
Which I imagine is probably going to be one of the recurring themes of this show, in addition to sitting around delivering exposition in offices.
I don't know about that, but I know that Major Armstrong is freaking terrifying a lot of the times, especially with his shirt off.
I have a note which I want to just get out of the way right now, which is that I suspect that Major Armstrong may be buying shirts that are a couple sizes too small, because at the very end, when he delivers his final blow, he flexes his muscles so hard that the shirt is just shattered into 1,000 tiny fraying pieces. And I can't help but think that, that situation could easily be avoided just by buying a slightly bigger shirt.
Are we talking about the ending as in like the very ending like
of this
credits
episode.
thing?
He does it during the credits as well, but even
Okay.
before that,
Yeah,
when he
that's
delivers,
a reoccurring joke or gag or whatever. Is Armstrong just for no reason whatsoever, like during battle and all that, like throwing his shirt off and fighting
which,
someone.
as we all know, is a terrible tactic, but it looks totally beast. Anyway,
It looks beast, but it's also really weird. I mean, and the characters even acknowledge this. Like, there's several times where there will be a character like saying, "Did he have to do that? Did he really?"
so after Edward and Alphonse meet the freezer for the first time, and of course, because this is still the first act, this isn't going to lead anywhere. This is just them getting to know each other, say hi, get maybe
Beat each other up a little.
yeah, beat each other up a little bit, but not enough to really mean anything at all. We're then taken back to an office where we are introduced to more characters who I imagine we will get to know better later on, one of whom we discover is also an alchemist. There seems to be a lot of alchemists in this world.
And you're going to learn that there are quite a few alchemists that are working for the military. Not all of them do, but there are quite a few that do.
After this office scene, our characters are then taken home with someone who is clearly meant to be a stereotypical new dad. He's got a little girl who is adorable in the way that she needs to be. She's perfectly functional as a character who just sort of points and says things that don't mean anything whatsoever. And we're introduced to this first little hint that Alphonse may be a bit of a secret person, because they're eating a delicious meal and the father asks Alphonse,
"Why aren't you eating? And why are you wearing your armor?"
and they act all sort of embarrassed about it, and they're like, "Oh, he's training, so he's gotta maintain that," some sort of terrible excuse that, of course, they just accept.
I mean, the people who they're talking to aren't alchemists themselves. They might work with them, but they aren't alchemists themselves, so they're probably just like, well, they're alchemists, they're weird, so whatevs.
That'll be our headcanon. They just sort of accept it as, okay, yeah, alchemists are weird, they say weird stuff. All right, that's our headcanon. And then in the next scene, we see them...
We're probably going to get so much flack for that, too.
We see them lying in bed, and it is revealed...
Well, Alphonse is not in a bed. He's actually just sitting in a corner or something. Like,
yes, that is correct. He is sitting in the corner, and and he asks, "Oh, was that food good?" And Edward says, in a way that I can't, like, I was sort of surprised by this. He's like, "Oh yeah, it was delicious," and I just can't help but think, Edward, you jerk, because he can't eat it.
Yeah, that's...
the parsley and the potato. Oh, man, like, you should absolutely have it. But it is this sweet moment where this is sort of like, this is exposition as it should be done, in that you're learning a bunch of things at the same time by way of the story. You're learning, first off, that he doesn't have a body, and second off, you're learning about the relationship that these two brothers have, which is that they care about each other very much, and their ultimate goal, and it's not stated in any sort of dramatic way, you just understand it from this sweet little scene, that their goal is to get back to the way things were and to return them to their regular bodies.
And it's a very good scene, I think. It's really good. I think it's really well done. Despite Edward being a jerk in that scene. But, Alphonse can't feel hunger at that point, so it's okay.
I did not know that. Honestly, I imagined Alphonse sitting at the table.
He doesn't even have a stomach or a tongue at that point.
I just imagined him sitting there the whole time being like, "Oh man, that looks so good, but I can't have any." But knowing that he doesn't feel hunger definitely changes that scene for the better, I think.
Yeah, because he's curious as to how hungry it would make him if he were to actually smell it and all that. He doesn't exactly know what it's like to smell anything at that point. He doesn't even have a nose.
After that, we return to transmutation circles and that line, which you seem to be okay with, but I definitely am not, where he says, by the way, audience, the human body is 70% water. Keep this in mind because we're probably going to use it some way that is going to be important to the climax. It isn't, but, just sort of...
I kind of wish they just they kind of didn't do that and just kind of went with, and just kind of had the, freezing alchemist at, because the Freezing Alchemist towards the end does the same line, except it's a lot more epic. He's cornered and and they're like, stop, you can use no more water here. And his arm's bleeding and he's like, I've got all the water I need, 70% of my body. And he creates this spear that he just throws at Edward using his blood. And I'm like, that is intense.
I would have been perfectly happy if those two lines had been cut completely, so that
I would have been okay with the line where that the Freezing Alchemist does. I don't really care. I'm okay. I mean, I'd be okay with that staying and Edward's line being gone.
My reasoning for saying that you could get rid of both of them is that this is common enough knowledge that if you already know it, you don't need to hear it. And if you don't already know it, you're probably not going to, it's not going to really change your experience of the story anyway, because you can understand, oh yeah, he's using water to freeze these people. And later on during the climax, oh yeah, he's using his own blood to do crazy stuff, because there's a continuity visually. You don't have to explain things outright in this instance. And I felt like that particular line of exposition was a bit sloppy, and I could have done without it.
I think it was okay when the Freezer used it, the Freezing Alchemist, but I don't think Edward really needed to say anything about 70% water.
After this, stuff. We realize that what's going to be going on for the next entire act. For the rest of the climax, basically, we're going to be dealing with what is a giant ice transmutation circle, which, again, is sort of a strangely huge set piece to enact during the first episode, especially by a character who means nothing.
It is. Oh boy, Dylan. You have no idea. You really do not. Don't get me wrong, the character does die. The character does not come back. This character does, but he does end up meaning something, and it's just,
I would be fine with that being the case if this weren't the first episode. But it's the first episode. What? Why? I want to know, why did they make the decision that they did to focus on this story for the first episode, instead of what I think should have been the first episode, which is the episode that comes right after this?
You'll learn that they had plans and that it kind of works.
I am eager to find out how it works eventually. For now, it just sort of feels...
It's going to be so awesome. I can't wait for you to see it.
My next note that I have, which is that all of the alchemists thus far who manipulate physical elements seem to have these calling cards that they build into everything. Edward has his face at the end of the mace that he makes out of metal, which I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. But then we see in the rubble that all of the rocks have Armstrong's face on them as well. And I just can't help but think,
what is with everyone's faces on everything?
Is this going to become a recurring gag throughout the show? Because I don't like it.
Well, actually, Edward's face on all his transmuted stuff isn't going to be as recurring a gag as Armstrong putting his face on everything.
I can deal with that, because Armstrong himself is kind of a funny character.
Although Edward's style is going to kind of be a gag, because he's got a weird, tacky style. It's going to be a recurring gag that people are going to be like, your style is terrible, dude.
I can definitely wait for tacky visuals. We're also introduced to, I'm just sort of scanning through the little preview that you get when you scroll over the Netflix timeline. There's a shot that we see twice in this episode of some old and wrinkly face who I imagine is probably going to belong to a character that will be important later on.
Oh my gosh, the spoilers, they want to burst forth.
There's fighting that takes place, which is briefly punctuated by a flashback, which I could have done without, which is...
I was okay with that. I thought it was pretty cool.
This flashback is kind of unnecessary because we're going to see it really pay off in the second episode, which is much, much more dramatic. But in this episode, we're just sort of saying, oh, okay, like this, the metal dude, he is actually a suit of armor, and the spirit of the brother has been affixed to it through some magic that we are informed is completely, it is referred to as a taboo, and therefore slightly surprising even to this guy who's like, I'll gladly kill people, but like, you guys are crazy.
Yeah.
He's making a giant chalk circle out of ice throughout the entire city, and he's looking at this suit of armor with a spirit attached to it, and he's like, that's a bit weird.
I mean, he's trying to freeze the like military capital of this state using a giant chalk circle. And he's like, you guys are crazy.
It is a very dramatic scene, though, and it is sort of being that...
You're right, that is a little weird.
As someone who might be coming to this having no idea what is going on, it is a very, very big hint that sort of there's a lot of drama that is going to take place here that is going to be very, very personal. And it's not going to be a, I'm going to punch you and you're going to punch back kind of drama, but a people are scarred emotionally. My
soul is completely ripped in half kind of drama.
Literally.
Like literally. Like Alphonse, that's basically kind of what happened to him. Well, not completely. I mean, he basically lost a piece of him, his body.
After this flashback, in which we see roughly sort of what happened to them in the past, Isaac the Freezer is suddenly possessed by the same fate that befalls all people who, for the sake of the plot, need to be suddenly incapacitated, which is that he suddenly becomes magnetically attracted to the ground, and he can't seem to rip himself free.
Well, he falls to the ground slowly, is the idea.
I mean, but there's no reason why. Like, it's dramatic, and it looks cool. But
the idea is that Führer Bradley...
We'll get to the Führer in a second, but he's just sort of punched by the kid a couple times, which isn't in any way, shape, or form more dramatic or powerful than what he's been hit at earlier. But suddenly now it's like, oh, okay, like I've been hit by rocks multiple times throughout this entire show, but now I'm punched in the stomach by a little boy and I'm on the ground and I can't get up.
And he's bleeding by the arm, yeah. Yeah, that is a little weird.
But you sort of forgive it because he does deliver a very dramatic line in which he's like, but humans are 70% water. And you're like, oh, he's going to manipulate Edward Elric. But no, he manipulates himself in order to attack Edward, which I thought was a clever little twist. And then he saunters off into the Sin City scene of the episode.
Oh boy, and that episode I thought was pretty cool. Like, you've got one side of the alley where you've got Führer Bradley, and, you know, that side is all black and white for the most part.
It feels very dreamlike.
Yeah, I thought it was an awesome way of doing things. And he forms another spear, because he lost the other one because he used it on Edward, and he forms another spear out of his own blood, which, again, I'm like... Well, no wonder he kind of looks like he's about to collapse even when he's running at the guy. He just used a bunch of blood to make 2 freaking spears, one of which he already shot at Edward Elric, and I'm like, this guy is insane. But, you know, the Führer ends up being really fast and ends up, like, really quickly sidestepping a attempt on his life and quickly draws his blade. You don't exactly see him draw his blade at all.
And this is sort of the interesting thing about that scene is that I'm watching it and I'm wondering to myself, is the Führer real? Is he imagining this? Because of that dreamlike state. And you don't see him move at all, really. Like, all of the motion that you perceive in this scene is achieved through sound effects. There's no facial movement. There's no talking from him at all. You can easily sort of imagine that this is a hallucination on the part of Isaac. And that is honestly what I thought was going on, was that this was Isaac descending into the forbidden section of Dagobah to fight, oh, it's Darth Vader, but secretly it's me, sort of thing going on here. But as we find out later, this is probably actually what happened.
Yeah, actually it is what happened. Wait, what?
Spoilers.
Well, what happened?
I'm saying that as someone who has seen the second episode, I know that this is just how the Fuhrer happens to attack people. Yeah. And so, like, once you see that in the following episode, you realize, okay, no, this was real, or it real enough that it doesn't matter if it actually happened or not. You're just sort of, okay, yeah, this is our first introduction to the Fuhrer, and a great introduction at that, killing off the monster of the week, being like, you're nothing to me.
Wow. Yeah. It's awesome.
We see what is presumably, though he never confirms it, a Philosopher's Stone that disappears. And again, we have that shot of the wrinkly old dude or lady.
And then after that scene, there's a more intense variant of the sitting in an office talking.
That is interrupted magnificently by Armstrong.
No. Actually, I was talking about the one where...
Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but because I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Before that, I just want to say, like, those roses, somebody had to draw those roses, and I can't imagine the look on their face as they're saying, this is going to be a great gag. Or, alternatively, why in the heck am I drawing these roses?
I should be drawing something else. Why am I drawing these roses? Anime is weird.
After this particular brand of weirdness, then we come to the office scene that you wanted to talk about.
Oh boy. This scene, it's one of those scenes where, you're kind of terrified, and you know why, but you also kind of don't.
Well, like, officially, you don't know anything. Like, this scene tells you nothing.
I mean, it tells you nothing, but the atmosphere is such that, you've got that little fat guy in the corner who's...
You think that he's eating someone.
Yes, you think that. He might not be, but
he could be eating cake. Like, it could be dark chocolate with coconut on top.
It probably isn't cake based on the sound, but it's definitely meat or something, I think. But, he could be eating someone. He could be eating a gazelle out, for all I know.
Either way, anyway. The dark red and the slishy, sloshy sound effect that they put over the top of it leads you to believe that this is probably not a good guy, and he's probably not eating healthy food.
Well, that's kind of... Oh, yeah.
And then we see who I suspect might be the villain of this season.
Oh, my gosh.
The seductive Miss Scarlet talking on the phone to who cares. This is just our way of getting to know who is probably going to be the villain of this season.
Oh my gosh, Dylan, this is kind of torture to me because I so want to tell you so much about what's going on, but I know that I'd ruin it because there's so much I know about this, and I'm like...
Right, because you've seen the whole series.
I have.
This is why I think that this is going to be an interesting show, because... You know what is coming, and you have seen the entire series. You love this series, and you've seen other anime, which you also love. I have only seen the next episode. This and the episode after.
Oh my gosh. Do we want to do 3 episodes tonight, or just one more?
We're just going to do one more. I will also say that I don't consider myself a fan of anime. I watched Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro, which I loved, but decided that was probably about as deep as I was going to go into that hole.
Okay.
I have tried getting into many other anime, which I have not been able to get into. But this, I think, I know that I sound very critical of it. I really loved this episode. This is one of the best animes that I have ever seen.
Which might not be saying much sometimes in terms of animes.
I have started many. I have started many episodes of an anime and been like, yeah, this just isn't reaching out to me. This isn't grabbing me. I'm going to sound fairly critical of a lot of episodes. That's just what's going to happen, because as somebody who makes things myself, that is the kind of stuff that I look for. Do we want to round this episode off before continuing on to our next episode?
Yeah, I'd like that, because I still have yet to watch the next episode, at least, I mean, I have seen it, don't get me wrong, but I need to refresh my memory.
All right. Well, we're not going to have a fancy outro for this episode. We're just gonna say, see you.
Hear you later, Dylan.
I'll hear you later.
Bye.